Welcome back to another episode of the Ranger Shop. So in this episode, what we're going to cover is putting in a locker. We're going to install a locker in our front ends of our Ranger. And what I'm going to do also is I'm going to swap over the hubs to manual hubs. Because this truck right now, it's got full-time hubs. Basically, there is nothing, it's just the CV shaft comes out. It's locked onto the bearing, splined onto the bearing like any front wheel drive car. And then it's just anytime the front tires are turning, those axle shafts are turning. So now, why am I doing this? Well, the locker itself, you can actually install this locker with these full-time hubs. Many have done it. What it does is it gives you a clicking noise. Usually when you're turning, well, yeah, it's when you're turning because the two axles are turning at different speeds. So then the locker. Now this is what they call a lunchbox locker. It's not an air locker or anything. It's always in there. It's always on. So there's a few different manufacturers. Aussie locker. This is a Lockrite locker, PowerTrax. I'll give you the numbers and all the parts to do this in just 1 second. But what I wanted is I wanted to be able to disconnect my front hubs. I don't like the idea of everything always spinning, and I don't like the idea of, especially with the locker being in the front, having it clicking and always operating. I would rather get out into the bush, lock my hubs when I need it, and then go. I also, when I'm towing my trailer, often I'll put it into 4 low just to maneuver it, you know, to get it just in the right spot you want. Maybe you're on a steep hill, especially with a manual, or a steep decline, whatever it is. It's nice to just throw it into 4 low and then to go nice and slow through the obstacles. So this way, I will be able to throw it into 4 low even if I'm on pavement, and no problem. I'll still be able to back it up, move it around. It's easy. So that's my thinking, that's my reasoning. So let's get into the parts of what it takes to convert your full-time hubs into manual hubs, and then what it takes to install these lunchbox lockers in our trucks. Okay, so what are you going to need to get this project off the ground? So I've got both right and left axle, got a couple bearings here, and then to get these bearings on, what's different is there's a couple seals you need. So here's the part number for the inner seals. I'll show you when we do the installation where they go. But you need 2 of those, and then your bolts. So the bolts are a little different that hold these bearings on. Now this is something I'm not really sure of. I don't understand why, but that's what everybody said. So we'll check it out. I'll pull out the original bolts and we'll check it out compared to these bolts, see why on earth we had to replace these, but we'll see. Anyway, so I ordered them. Here's the part number for those bolts. There you go. So you got 3 of those aside. And then your hubs. So for the hubs, I've got these mile marker hubs. I did a little bit of research. They seem to be better built. They stay in better. Some of the other brands, they tend to pop out and you'll lose your hub as you're driving along the road or off-road. So that's something I wasn't really interested in. Also too, I bought these on Amazon clearance. As you can tell, the box is a little bit beat up and stuff. But I mean, it was close to half off for, you know, the same as you would buy in the store. So always check out Amazon clearance. I'm telling you, you can buy some good stuff for our Rangers. Again, because there's so many out there. And then I've got 1 axle seal that I'm replacing. That's what this is. So I've got a front axle seal. And then here's the locker. So you can see, we'll get into it a little more when we get into the actual installation video, but you got your 2 sides, new pin, springs for that ratcheting action. Anyways, we'll get into this. This is something that more, it's easier when you see it done than to try and explain it with words. So let's get started. Okay, so we got our tires off. Here's the jacking points I like to use if I'm working on the front end. It's just behind our torsion bars, behind the bracket for that. And I like to use good heavy jack stands. This arrangement does make it a little bit front heavy, but it gives me lots of room to work in here, so I can you know, drop the diff, I can jack up the lower control arm. Got lots of room without jack stands being right in the way if I were to say use the center cross member or something. What I like to do also is I slide the tires underneath the frame rails. So the worst case scenario, if your jack stands were to fail or tip or something, you're going to have it land on the tire, on the rim. Buy you a little extra time to get out from underneath it. Okay, next steps. What we're going to do here is we're going to pull the brake assembly apart, get that out of here. Then we're going to take the actual bearing off, and then we're going to pull our CV axles out. Going to drop our front skid plate, and then we'll drop the diff. Here we are, we got our brakes off. So what I recommend doing is just take them all off loaded, so you've got your caliper bracket, everything's here all in one, and just hang it off of you know, a piece of wire or a bungee cord, something to be able to hold it so that all the pressure is not hanging on your brake hose. You don't want to have all that pressure on your brake hose. So that's out of the way, our rotor's out of the way. Now we can see what we're dealing with here. So to get this off here, what I like to do is, while this spindle is attached, I like to break loose the bearing, because the bearing is very difficult to undo. So to get this off, there's 3 bolts on the back. You can see right here. There's 2 on this side and then 1 on the other side. So you just loosen those off, get them out, back them off a bit. And then what I'll do is I'll take my air hammer and I'll just chisel this one way and then chisel it back the other way. And I'll soak this whole thing with some penetrating fluid. So just go back and forth, you work it back and forth like that, and that penetrating fluid works its way into this hub. Once this is loose, then you can take your spindle off. So then to take the spindle off, don't do the upper control arm in here, because this has got your alignment adjustments already in there. Take it right off of here. So just loosen that bolt and take it off. Now you got to be careful, because this is under load, right, from our torsion arms here. So once the torsion bars, basically what's holding this, you can see it's all the way, it's touching my frame here, and then if I take this off, what's going to be holding is my shock, so I'll wreck my shock. So what you do is just jack this up a little bit, get a little jack stand underneath this lower control arm, and that'll help hold it while you're doing this work in here. Otherwise it will put too much pressure on your shock. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to loosen off this ABS sensor wire off the wheel bearing, get this wheel bearing loose, maybe even out, and then jack up, put a jack stand under the lower control arm, loosen this bolt, get this spindle out. We've got the wheel bearing out. Basically, you saw how I did that, back and forth. I've got the jack under here right now, but plus I got the jack stand under the lower control arm. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to loosen this top bolt here, take this top bolt out, and then you just hit this right about here, and it'll come down, and you can hit up on the control arm. To get the tie rod end off, if you just hit the side of these, make sure you don't clip the boot, but you just hit here, and then these things will pop up because they're tapered, and then you can pull them out pretty easy. But look at all the garbage in here. So we're going to replace those seals on the outside there too. Try and keep the water and dirt and stuff from getting inside here. So there's our axle out, our CV axle. It was a little bit tighter than I thought. I had to move the shock. I thought I could squeeze it by the shock, but I couldn't quite. So just undo those couple bolts there, slide it off to the side. Again, I've got this lower control arm supported. You can see the jack stand right there. To get these axles out, you just got to stick a pry bar between the diff housing and this edge here. And you just pry it a bit, because there's this little clip here. See that little clip? So we got everything out here, and I just want to do a little side-by-side comparison of the older style compared to the new style. So you can see here on the CV shaft. So this is the older style where you got the hubs. See, it's not threaded, where you could just thread on the nut and it just locks in solid on the wheel bearing. So the new style, it's got a little needle bearing that runs right on this shaft right here. You can kind of see it here. There's a nice cap covering it, keeping the grease in. But that runs right on that journal, and then that holds the shaft, and then your hub is splined to this, and then splined to your bearing, your wheel bearing. So that's what gives it. It's a little bit of a weaker system because of that. But as for the size of the bearings are almost exactly the same size. The hub itself, you can see how it's a little bit wider at the back here. Due to a lot of this here is for the vacuum, because these were originally vacuum operated hubs, and yeah, so we're obviously not going to do that. We're not having vacuum operated hubs in here. It was just a disaster, that whole system. This is the axle seal. The wheel seal here. It's on the back, and that's basically what keeps all your junk out of your bearing, but it also was providing a vacuum seal for operating the hubs. These would always go, and then you'd have leaking hubs, and then you wouldn't be able to lock into four-wheel drive. But anyways, we're going to put new seals in there because I just like keeping all the crud out of that cavity that's in here where the vacuum would normally operate. The actual axle itself is pretty much the same size diameter, maybe a little bit thicker here than that one. Everything else is the same. It seems to articulate a little bit better, but probably that's just because this is brand new, whereas this has got a lot of kilometers on it. The hub itself is the same, again, same size bearing, same size splines. So that's it. One other thing too, I don't think you need the bolts. I've seen a few guys say that you got to replace these bolts. I don't think so. I don't think they're torque to yield, and they're not a one-time use bolt, so I'm not sure why we got that. It's the same thread, same length, same size. Anyways, that was a waste of money. Okay, so now I've got my axles out, as you can see. What I did is I just bolted the spindle back in just in case those jack stands move as I'm in there trying to wiggle that axle out of there. So I just bolted that spindle back in at the top just to hold it. Now I'm going to take off this front cover, the skid plate, and then we're going to drop that front axle out of there. So I've taken out my front drive shaft, and what I recommend is just taking a little bit of electrical tape and then just wrapping up these needle bearings. It'll just stop you from knocking the cap off and then getting dirt in there or getting some losing some needle bearings. So what we're going to do is wrap this up, and then I'm going to spray these with penetrating fluid on the top and on the front, and then we're going to drop this diff out of here. So here's our little diff out. Little teeny Dana 35. I mean, it's a little truck, right? So my next step with this, here's the axle seal. You can see there it's been leaking, it's all wet. So that's the axle seal I'm going to be replacing. But I want to get it stand up. I want to flip this so that the pumpkin's like this, and then I can work on it without too much difficulty. So also what I'm thinking, what I want to do here is these diffs, they've got a fill hole in the side, but they don't have a drain. You got to take the cover off. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm either going to drill and tap a hole or put a bung, weld a bung in here to drain it, or I might just go from the bottom and put a drain plug in it. So once we get this out, we'll check it out and see what it looks like to do that. So let's get this stood up, easy to work on, and let's open it up, see what it looks like inside. Next step is I'm going to pull the carrier out. To do that, I'm going to take off the caps here, the bearing caps. I'm going to mark them though, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one dot and one dot, and then I'm going to put two dots and two dots, and then I just know I can line those up and it's good. Once I get the carrier out, there's the pin for the this thing uses a roll pin to hold the pin in here, and so we'll tap that roll pin out, and then once that roll pin's out, we'll be able to get the side gears out of here and be able to replace them with our locker gears. Also, I'm going to drill through, this is the bottom here, so I'm going to drill right through here, and I'm going to put a plug. So I'm going to find a nice flat spot here somewhere, maybe over here on this side, and I'm going to put a drain plug right in there so that I can drain the oil out of this, especially with this locker in there. I think they say 500 kilometers or something, then drain it. And to drain these things is very tough. You either got to move the rack, or you got to pull the diff housing here down. So that's what I'm going to do, and then I can always fill it through the side port. Then I'm going to put in my new seal over there. To get this, there's an intermediate shaft right in here, and so that just pries out. So I'll just pry off that pin, pop that shaft out, and take that shaft out, and then I'll be able to lift this carrier out. Let's get this thing out. So I got the diff diff housing sitting in my vise, and what I'm thinking is, looking in here, it would be nice to go right here. That's a nice flat spot, but that's right where the ring gear is riding, and just in case it's sticking up a little bit, I don't want to run the risk of hitting that. So then to go to this side, you can see they've got this big brace here, you know, reinforced rib. So I think I got to go a little bit further, and then there's a little bit of a round spot here, and then this is flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right in here. So that's right about there. So I should be coming through right about here on the inside. To install the plug here, what I will do is I'll just clean this off first with the wire wheel on my grinder, clean that off all nice, and then I'll mark my spot, pilot hole, and then what I'll do is just put a little bit of grease on the bottom here, just a little bit of grease, and it'll stop the metal shavings from falling through. But plus I've got this rag in here. So our housing's done. Now we're moving on to the diff. So again, like I mentioned, there's a pin in here, just a roll pin. So we'll just pound that roll pin out, and then we'll be able to take out that cross pin for the to install our locker. Okay, I got the ring gear off here, and I just drove through the pin. So the pin's out. Now let's pull these gears out of here. Okay, there's our side gears, and there's our shims that are behind the side gears. We want to keep those because we're going to be reusing them. Let's get our locker. So the first step in setting up our front locker is we need to just check the clearances between the pin and the gears. So what you do is you take each side gear, like the locker side gears, we put the thrust washer on. So before we do that, we use a little bit of gear oil. So I got a little bit of gear oil here. Don't use grease on here. I see a lot of people use grease, but that's going to give you a thicker reading, and then that grease will burn off when you're driving, and you've got distorted reading. So just oil, a little bit of oil on there, and then these are going to slide in to where the side gears are. And then what we're doing is we're going to drop the pin down, and we're going to use a feeler gauge, and we're going to check the distance between this spacer here and the pin. And that's going to tell us if our carrier is warped, if it's too big, if we need another thrust washer on the end here, or if we need if this is even going to work, you know, for our for the application. So let me slide these in there, get that pin in there, and then let's take some measurements. Okay, we've got our spacers in here. Now we're just going to slide the Lock-Right pin in there. The pin's different than the factory one. It doesn't have the cutouts for the oil for the gears. Actually, you know what? I'm going to throw a little bit of oil in here also. Okay, and drop that down in there. And we're going to put it right through just as if we were to install it, because we want it perfect. Okay, so now we can see we've got our spacers, pin, spacers. So now between here, between the pin and the spacers, we need between 5 thou and 20 thou, and not more than 8 thou difference between the two. I guess that'll tell you if the case here is warped, if the carrier. Okay, so let's see what we got for thickness here. So there's 20. Let's see what we got there. So that doesn't go in. Okay, work our way down. Okay, 19, 15. Now let's go to 15. There, that just barely fits in this side. Very tight. And this side, nope, doesn't. Okay, so let's drop her down one more. Let's go down, that was 15. Let's go down to 12 thou. Okay, so 12 thou fits in here nicely. And so we got 15 on this side, 15 thou, and 12 thou. So as long as they're within, what did it say, 8 thou? If there's not an 8 thousandths difference, it's good. So that's good. We're right in the money. So 12 thou and 15 thou, and we're still under that 20 thou maximum. But again, that's with the thrust washers. You got to reuse your thrust washers on either side of these side gears here. Okay, so now let's continue with our assembly here. We're going to slide the pin out, get this thing together. Okay, so we got our side gears in there. We've got our little spacers in on the side gears right now. For the pins, we're going to take a little bit of grease. We're going to fill these holes with a little bit of grease, and then we drop the pins down in there. And the pins got to go all the way down so they're flush. You know they're in the right hole when they're flush like that. So now that assembly can slide in there. So we need to get the spacer, and then we're going to slide this assembly into the diff here. There we go, just like that. So there we go. So that's the one side's done. So now same with this side, the other side. Oh, pins fell out. Ooh, yay, yay. There's a lot of moving pieces here. Okay, so that's it. We've got both spacers in there. You can see the both spacers. And we've got the pins in. Now let's slide it in. Okay. Now, we gotta line up this. See what we're doing is we're just lining up the pin's going to go, the cross pin's going to go down in there. And then what we're going to do is slide these locking pins into the other side. So then it'll keep these two locked together. So I just need a little screwdriver here. Okay, and we'll just slide them through. See, now it's locked there. And I'll just lock the same on this side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our spring assembly, and we're going to slide it in here, and that's going to push that pin over. So So remember, we've got the small spring inside the large spring. So there we go. Springs in there. I'm just going to roll it, get the other side here. Right there. Put a spring in there. Eek. Okay, now we'll get these other pins. That pin there. Now we're going to get a spring and we're going to put it in this way. This will be a little bit more difficult coming back the opposite way, right? No springs in there. Next one. Right here. Now you can feel the spring when it clicks into the pocket that's back that way. You can feel that. So I think you want it, make sure that it's clicked in both sides. So we'll just spin this thing and check it out here. So there we go. All the pins look good. Remember, we've got our clearances. We've already checked that. So we're set. So now we're going to put the pin back in. So we just rotate it. And then we've got our special pin there for this system. Just line up that. Push it through. Got a roll pin. Tap it in, try and be careful not to hit the bearing here. So I'm having a problem here. I got everything assembled, no problem there. Everything's good. But the cross pin that they sent with the kit is a different size than the factory one. You can see that the size of the hole up here where the pin goes through. So now the roll pin will not fit through there, not even close. It's about 3 drill bits difference in size. If you look at this drill bit here, goes through nice through there. This one here is not even close. Not even close. So there's no way I could drill this out because it's a hardened cross pin. So there's no way I'm going to be able to drill this out. I tried. It didn't even scratch the surface just because it is hardened. Because you need it hard for the for when this it's what actuates this. It's what pushes the locker in. I could put my factory cross pin back in, but you can already see it's starting to wear. And this one's not hard. This one I can actually drill fairly easy because I wanted to test if it was also a hardened pin. So this is not a hardened pin, but the one that comes with the kit is hardened. So then I thought, well, I could get a roll pin that's the size of this. You can see the damage just trying to get it in there. There's no way it's going in. I could get a roll pin the size of this, but then it would have play in the other part and it might work its way out. I don't know. The last thing I'd want is that pin to drop out where you're driving along. So then what I'm thinking is, what I might do is just take, I've got one of these big long bolts here, and it fits through the cross pin just perfectly, and then it goes right through that that gallery here in the carrier. So I'm thinking I'm going to put this bolt in like that, cut it to size, and then double nut it and Loctite it in there. Because there's really no pressure on this here. just that's why they use this small little roll pin in there. It's hardly anything. But there's no pressure. The pressure is against the case, like against the carrier, and against the pin, as the pin's moving like this in the carrier. So this basically, this bolt just has to keep it from falling out. But it's the weirdest thing because I've checked online and nobody else mentions that the cross pin is not the right size, that won't fit. Yet this kit, I double checked it again, and the number, it works for the Ford Ranger, the front. And I mean, it fit all this, the thrust washers fit on good, the axles fit in here. I checked everything just to make sure that I wasn't doing something wrong, installing a kit that's not meant for here. So it's just this pin, just the hole. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the bolt in there, double nut it, Loctite it, and we're going to call that good. Unfortunately, I don't like to, but got to keep moving forward. So something like that. I definitely not recommend doing something like this if it was the rear diff, because with the rear diff, you know, it's always spinning, and man, if it ever came out, you'd be in trouble. Front diff, I should still be able to get out of the bush if it pops out. That's it. So we got double nutted, Loctite. And what I'm going to do too is I'm just going to stake it, just so that no matter what, it won't come out. Well, I got the diff out of the truck. I'm going to replace this axle seal too. It's so much easier here. Just got a block of wood underneath it, and I'm just going to tap it down. I'm going to find a cup that's exactly the same size as the seal, tap down on the metal part. Okay, there we go. So the diff's in now. I did up those 3 bolts, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to slide in the intermediate shaft that's in here, and then I'm going to slide my CV joints in, CV shafts in, and do up this drive shaft. Just a quick note on the intermediate shaft. The inside, the splines that go to the inside, the clip that's on here, the little C-clip, that needs to be removed, because the locker doesn't have, like here's the gear, you can see right there where that clip snaps in. The locker doesn't have that spot for it to go, so this just sits in there. Basically, if you were to pull your CV shaft out, this will also come out, and then you got to slide it back in. It's a little bit of a pain, but as long as you know, it's not too bad. Just going to put a little bit of oil on here, a little bit of oil on the needle bearings in the axle, and slide it in. Okay, got my intermediate shaft in there. I just squirt a little bit of oil in there too, to just lubricate those needle bearings. So now to get this seal at the back here, this one, I just air hammered it out the back, and we've got our new seal to go in. But before I stick it in, I'm going to just wire wheel this to clean it all up. Same with the back side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my bearing press tool, and just this one right here, and we're going to press it in, pull it in from the back, just pull it in. So here, I'll set you up so you can see what I mean. Here's the final setup of that interior seal here. So it's recessed down in there almost until it hits in here. There's a right in here there's this metal ridge, so it's got to be set right down into that ridge. So if you have a difficult time getting this seal in here, you can drive it in with a hammer, like just tap it around if you don't have it like a bearing driver like I used. And one good suggestion would be just to use the old seal. So grab your old seal, put it over there so you don't damage the new seal, and then just drive it in. Okay, so now that's in. Now we can slide our CV shaft in and then work onto our bearings. So we got our new seal in there. You can see you got the axle shaft in here now, all greased up. When you're sliding the CV shaft in here, just got to make sure that there's a lip here where the seal goes, that it's not rolled and stuck in between the axle shaft and this piece of metal. You don't want to pinch that, especially if you're using vacuum operated hubs, but in this case it doesn't really matter because we're going to manual hubs. Now the process is we slide the bearing on here. That's the needle bearing will support here, the wheel bearing. It's got a needle bearing in it that'll support that shaft. And then we lock this hub or this CV shaft in with these little clips. So those are the little clips you need. So you'll need 2 of these to do this manual hub conversion. Don't worry, yeah. Notice I just greased in here too. I cleaned this out and I greased it because there's an O-ring that goes around the wheel bearing too that you don't want to pinch. So here's our wheel bearing. You can see, I guess, just a few things. First of all, the ABS sensor points forward, so you want that on the front. Inside you can see the needle bearing in there, right down in here. So we're going to pack that with grease. So we're going to use some nice high temp grease and put it in there. And then here's that O-ring that I was talking about. You can see that O-ring right there. So that's the one you don't want to damage. So that's why we grease our spindle. Okay, so we got our bearing in there. Here's our axle shaft. So now there's a seal that goes right down inside there, and it locks the shaft from moving in and out on the bearing because you need it pressed into the hub, right? So this is the seal here. That's the part number I gave you before. To put these seals on, they say it requires a special tool. This tool here, but you don't really need a tool. All you need is to find, I like to use PVC. You could use metal, but I'd rather use PVC pipe, 1.25" PVC pipe. So like here's a piece of pipe I've got just from a job that I did. So this is 1.25". You can use ABS, PVC, whatever. But now that fits right on here like that. And then you drive that in. So it's got a little ring on here. What I'm going to do is just going to pry this ring off and then slide the plastic piece onto the axle, and then we'll slide this ring onto that plastic piece there and then drive it down. So there's that ring in there. You can see it down inside, and I could hear it click into place. And how you can tell is if you can't pull the CV shaft that way, you know that that's holding it in now. So now we're set to put the hub on here. Okay, so we've got our retaining ring in there now. Everything's all set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the new O-ring on the outside here. that seals up the outside, keeps the dust from coming in. And then the actual hub themselves, these hubs, they don't require grease. You don't pack grease in them. It's just lightly oiled. So I'm just going to spray a little bit of oil it up, and then slide them in. Okay, just like that, we're done. So you can see now we're freewheeling. There's the CV shaft's not spinning. Put it on the lock. Now you're turning the whole diff. So these mile marker hubs, they've got these little clips here that lock these things in, because sometimes people were losing their hubs. These clips are supposed to help. But what I'm going to do also, just for a little bit of reassurance, is I'm going to take a zip tie, and I'm going to put a zip tie over the top here, and then just tighten it up to hold these teeth down on here, so these things are not going to pop off, or someone's not going to pop them off for me and just take them. So there we go, I got the tie straps on here. I'm still not sure if this is going to clear my wheel. I know I got aftermarket wheels. If you didn't have aftermarket wheels, you probably wouldn't clear, but I think my aftermarket wheels will clear, and that'll just keep it. I can't pull the thing off anymore now, it's solid. Okay, so now I'm just going to put the brakes on, connect the tie rod end, just make sure everything's tight on this side, and that's it. Just going to do the same to the other side. Get this thing back together. Let's go for a drive.